Let's take a few Discord questions here. I got them actually, Matt. I think I got them on my phone. I'll read a few, and then we'll do a few more stories. Let's see. Folks, do you think the media here in the U.S. will successfully Corbyn, Bernie Sanders, and left ideas? Well, I think they've Corbyn Sanders to an extent, although he's much more popular than Jeremy Corbyn. And then
it was the party that got him here, not the media.
Yeah, I think the left ideas are something that honestly they will keep filtering through. It's like Ronan and I were talking about. The conditions are such that there's going to be a big appetite for left ideas. The next step is building a left that is healthy enough and credible enough and institutional and strategic enough to do something with that. That's what I think.
And defending those ideas from co-option. There is a reason, for example, that Buttigieg was pushing Medicare for all who want it, that kind of nonsense, right? Which is a weasel way to get out of providing these policies. So, you got to make the policies popular, and then you have to prevent them from being stolen from underneath your feet, basically.
Right.
Can I just say one thing about that?
Please, go ahead. Please.
We need to develop a stronger way of discerning what is co-optation and what is just getting popular. Because I totally agree with you, Griscom, and there's a way of understanding when is a real corporate interest hijacking something, and what are the material ways we can evaluate something changing, versus one of the ways that the left has stayed marginalized for the last 2 decades is the minute something we believe in becomes popular, like by definition, when something reverberates out into a society, it's going to get a little watered down. It's not going to look how you want it to look. And so the way that, for example, like after Occupy Wall Street, the minute that the frame of the 99% became adopted in a more popular way, activists were like, we're being co-opted. We're being co-opted by MoveOn.org because we're influencing them and they're adopting our positions. It's just so, it's a joke. And I think on the flip side of that, to your point, David, is like, real co-optation is such a threat. It's such a threat because it pulls the power base that we have out from under us. And yeah, I would love to think about how to develop resources to discern the difference. Because I guess I'll just say that in my time, the way that people mark the difference is whether or not certain cultural signifiers are being hit, and that is not your compass.
Yeah.
Yes, and that goes back to, like, again, really, everybody needs to read Adolph Reed and watch our conversations. I'll keep banging it, and we're definitely going to have him on the show again soon, hopefully once a month. What is your response to someone, this is in a very similar vein, the real nod, what is your response to someone saying voters on the left haven't earned policy concessions at the ballot box?
Wait, so where are they asking that our voting bloc isn't strong enough to push for concessions?
I'll just read it. I mean, I think it's like the idea that, people on the left are voting, but it hasn't earned. What is your response to someone saying voters on the left haven't earned policy concessions at the ballot box? I mean, I guess you can guess that question might annoy me a little bit, but what do you guys think? Go ahead.
I mean, I do think that, we were talking about earlier about, potentially like being able to organize no votes, basically votes where people who are on the left aren't voting for the Democratic Party in an organized fashion. I do think eventually, like, we're going to have to be able to flex that muscle because I think a lot of Democrats still think that they can get by without having to appease the left wing of the party or the left wing of the country in general. But you know what? I just saying from a strategy perspective, I don't think you should ever look at your position and refuse to be bold and strong and to be able to demand in the moment, right? If you have the popular will and the demand and the ability to push for concessions, you absolutely should and can. I actually think that we're in a much stronger position than I think a lot of people realize.
Yeah, I don't. I mean, I think the problem is, and Joshua, I think you can maybe bridge this through like a consciousness thing. It's like, look, we are more powerful than we realize, because literally tomorrow, if a couple of million people even just said, no, nope, that would cause such a shock and a reverberation that, I mean, one possibility would be that you would get a much more overtly authoritarian crackdown. We need to be very real about that. It could be extremely intense and violent if 2 million people decided to like do a sort of general strike type of thing. You could see, you know, people could be immediately rounded up. Like, again, we can't be naive about the level of securitization and national security state.
Ben Shapiro flippantly talks about his wife being made to do medicine, right? But imagine if like doctor or nurses start striking, like what we're gonna see. I don't know. We could see ugly things.
We could see very ugly, but I'm also talking like, oh, you're doing a rent strike. Well, we have a new usury law. Like, you're going to get a 10-year. I mean, we already see people at like, you know, various different protests getting hit with insane, you know, I mean, look at the Doppel stuff, right? So again, we need to be really realistic and really grounded. And then on the other hand, yes, if that happens, another part of it would clearly be a signal to the system of, at the very least, okay, we're scared. We need to, you know, give you some actual solid reforms. So definitely there's a lot of power there. But the thing is like, and I liked what Ronan was saying, like, no, but it's also literally not. Because in order to literally have it, you need to know that there is a base and an institutional structure around it. And we need to build that. Like, when people say, okay, we're going to have a strike, we know that there's going to be people that are going to like help us, you know, have the groceries and things like that. Now, this is, and the point of having conversations like this is we need to build that. So it's not to say, I mean, this is like how the conversation to me gets polarized in a really unhelpful way when it's around voting, is it's either like essentially blue no matter who, which is obviously limited, or else it's just random discursive acts of protest or personal statement, or like, oh, but maybe some big explosion will happen. We need to concretely draft a strategy for actually setting that up. That's the kind of, and that's why I've been saying, I don't just want to have the fucking who are you going to vote for conversation. I think actually, for people who get annoyed at me for still recommending being tactical about that, I will say this. I think the conversation that I'm pushing is the first serious graduation from blue no matter who. Because I'm saying, fuck that. That is a ultimately pathetic, anemic position that will get us nowhere. However, if you don't have an actual, you know, don't write checks you can't cash. I want to come out and say, when I say we're going to pull the trigger on not voting for a candidate or having a strike, that means that tomorrow it's going to happen. That's how you get Malcolm X to stare down NYPD and treat a person, a black man they just beat the shit out of in the 40s or the 50s, like in the 50s, like in such a highly racist, polarized society, because he had an army with him that he literally could just say like, okay, we're going to march, we're going to walk down to the hospital. We're going to check on him. And the quote from the police officer in this anecdote, the police captain observing this said, no man should have that amount of power. That he was so freaked out by what Malcolm X could do with like the move of a finger that they stared down the NYPD in like the height of Northeast apartheid America. That's what we need to build, because if it's like, yeah, we're going to do that, and a handful of people take a brave action or a handful of people do a protest vote, it doesn't matter. Right. In fact, the only way it gets leveraged is for them to blame us for a bad outcome, which is obviously bullshit, but it's the game. Anyways, Joshua, please.
We're just so synchronized. I was going to give the same Malcolm example, which is why us being disciplined is so scary to them. And that it is the difference between consumer action versus a strike, you know, like the reason that I individual protest votes will not add up to anything. What you need to do is demonstrate that you have an infrastructure, that you have a switch you can flip. And that's the distinction between a lot of people, especially in, since the 90s, really. Protest tactics have been largely conceived of as like it's the punch, it's the way that you leverage pressure, and they can be sometimes, but they're mostly actually the flex. You're demonstrating the level of muscle you have, the level of self-organization you have, and there's an implicit threat, which is that we're peaceful now, we're organized, these are our numbers, we're showing you how many people we can mobilize and marshal, and if you don't meet X, Y, and Z, we're going to do something that's much more threatening. And that's why, for example, you could, in the March to War in Iraq, we had the biggest demonstrations around the world, but they weren't organized in such a way where our opposition understood that we had no infrastructure behind it. They said, you're going to come out in March, and if we don't meet your demands, you're going to go home and watch TV and complain. And that's what happened. And then when that happened, it proved to them that actually we're not organized, we're not disciplined, and we don't have that infrastructure. And so it is the difference between, a different kind of example is that I've campaigned against banks for a long time. And, a lot of banks invest in terrible, dirty fossil fuel industry projects. And the difference between some random individuals hearing about Chase Bank investing in the tar sands or in mountaintop removal coal mining, and then sending it out on social media and people closing their accounts individually when the bank has no idea why people are closing, it doesn't add up to much, versus you get a lot of people to do it on the same day in an organized way. The difference between that is it's night and day. It's night and day. And that's why individuals choosing to not vote for Biden randomly outside of an infrastructure that actually can say, having actually a pledge to sign on that say we will not vote for Biden unless X, Y, and Z is met, and like something like that is actually gives you something to lean on. Anything else is,
and by the way,
performance.
100%. And by the way, like, this isn't just in the future. Like, look, if people want to start, among all the other things we need to organize around, they are terrified about the youth turnout vote. And I will say, I'm not even convinced that Biden's going to be the nominee. Like, I think they're going to switch him out. But if there was a concentrated effort, I think change.org things are relatively useless. But like, let's just say as an example, if you started getting a public petition going and you got 1 million people to sign it that said, we are people. And again, by the way, this is another thing. You actually also have to offer the possibility of your support. It has to be written as, this is how you can get it, and here are the steps. These are 3 acceptable options for vice president, not platform. We're talking staffing. I mean, I would formulate it so it's ultra specific. But, if you wanted to start that project now and you started getting like signatures and numbers, that's the type of thing that might actually scare people and lead to a vice presidential pick. So just, there is a lot of power there, but if the power doesn't come from the abstract into the concrete, it doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
You just watched a Michael Brooks show video. Subscribe to get them all. Why wouldn't you? Don't be foolish. Click subscribe below and become a patron as well. Patreon.com/TMBS. Thanks, everybody.